Welcome to The Check-In, a podcast by Telos, where we explore the headlines from Israel, Palestine, and across the world, wading into the complexity of seemingly intractable conflict to discover the power of peacemaking to heal us, our community, and our world. This is your host, David Cadabot, checking in from Washington, D.C. Today on the show, we hear from our former colleague, Jack Saba. Jack was born in Jaffa, a historic Palestinian town on the coast that is now part of the Tel Aviv municipality. It spent many of his years growing up in the United States. Jack worked for Telos for 8 years before moving into a sabbatical year last September. None of us had any idea at the time what that year would hold for him or for any of us. In this episode, we get an update from Jack on what this past year has held for him and his family. Not only have they had to contend with the grief of watching the unrelenting destruction of Gaza and its people, the tightening of control over the Palestinian community within Israel, rockets from Iran and Gaza that send them running into bomb shelters, they also just this past week experienced an attack in their community as Palestinian gunmen killed 7 civilians near a light rail station. Jack shares his honest grief with us and invites us to consider what responsibility we might own to participate in the transformation of this seemingly ever-expanding spiral of violence. But he also invites us into the discipline of hope in action, gratitude for the work already being done. In a tangible way, we can support his family and community in these times. You'll also hear him talk about a store that Jaffa resident Adria Abu Shahade, who also happens to be Jack's wife, founded in 2019 called Hilweh Market. Hilweh reclaims space for Palestinian and Arab culture in Jaffa by working with Palestinian makers, shops, and designers to bring you the best of local and regional contemporary craft and design. We've included a link to Hilweh's online store in our show notes, and yes, they do ship to the States, and yes, you should buy some of their goods. They are great, and they support local communities. Folks, 1 year on in this mess, we must pause to name the grief we're all feeling. Jack invites us into that. And it's only from that place that we can begin to imagine a new future and build it together. We hope you enjoy the show. We are so grateful that you're joining us here today, Jack. It's good to see your face. It's good to have you on the show. We've missed you. It's been a whole year. Where are you checking in from?
I'm in Jaffa. Thanks for having me, DCAD. It's good to see you. It's good to be back in touch, especially this week. It's been an insane time.
Yeah.
This whole year, but this week especially for us personally.
Somehow the insanity grows. We never thought it was possible, but I feel like collectively we all need to just sigh and grieve together. But we are especially grateful that you're with us today. I know it's been a hard week, but I know there are so many people in our network, on our team even, who would be really grateful for the chance to hear from you, the chance to know how you're doing, how your family is doing, how the store is doing, even for those who follow, but also to hear what words you have for us as Americans, as for some of us American Christians who are deeply implicated in all that's happening right now on the ground in this expansion of war and violence. What is our role to play? What role can we play in all of this? But man, I think I would love to just start with a check-in with how are you faring? This past week has been insane. It's been a year of madness, many, many years of long work to transform the realities on the ground. And here we are. How are you doing right now?
Yeah, it's a loaded question, right? Everyone, including myself, is pretty rattled here in Jaffa. We're all still coming down from kind of the high adrenaline rush when your body turns on survivor mode from a couple nights ago.
Yeah, can you share with us what happened for those who may not have heard?
Yeah. So for those that missed it, so the night that there were missiles launched from Iran and landed in Israel and places in and surrounding Tel Aviv, at the same night here in Jaffa, there was an attack. Palestinian gunmen, opened fire against civilians in the streets of Jaffa. So this is a town that has both Palestinian citizens of Israel, Jewish Israelis, just families in the evenings going about. And so this has kind of become the natural part of this conflict, is that you feel less and less safe everywhere as an outcome of this escalation. And so here it came this time, very close to home. I was out of the house, like I was sharing, and I was with my daughter at a piano lesson at the local community center, and I started getting phone calls and video footage of the shooting attack, which happened around about 6:30, I would say 6:45-ish. And this was the shooting attack was happening less than a 10-minute walk from where I was. And so a lot of panic, a lot of people kind of checking in on where everyone is. This is a street. This is on Jerusalem Boulevard for those that have been to Jaffa. So this is a main kind of thoroughway. It was right near the light rail, so a lot of people commuting back from work. And so we were all checking on family members, where everyone was. Are people okay? So I stepped out of the piano lesson and checking in on everyone. And then my daughter comes out of the lesson crying because at the same time, everyone's phones started blaring from an Amber Alert type of siren. And so she had gotten startled from that because of the missiles that were launched and were about to land. And so
From Iran, for those who
from
may
Iran,
have
right?
missed.
And
Yeah.
so we were all rushed to the bomb shelter of the building, and it was just pure chaos. And you're caught with your kid who is freaking out. You're trying to check in on family members, and it just felt like the whole world was kind of crashing down. And it's I'm sure other communities and other Palestinians and other Israelis have had this and more intense feelings. But that was our little taste of it just this week, and it continues, right? And but it was a really, really intense couple of hours. The gunmen were eventually shot by police, Israeli police forces, right at the end of our block, actually, at the end of our street where our home is. So everything was really kind of in our community, in our neighborhood, happening really right there. I was in one place with my daughter, my wife was in another. So it's just a lot of emotions of stress and high anxiety. So we're still, as a community and as a family, we're still coming down from that. We really haven't processed everything there.
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, Jaffa is not a big city. It's a small community. People know each other. This isn't just something happening like way off in this random community. This is I mean, it's right there.
And where that event happened is a place you're familiar with and where you've been when you've spent some time here.
Yeah, I mean, I spent lots of time on Jerusalem Boulevard. I mean, when I was there, the light rail wasn't yet finished, but I know exactly, where this happened. And was doing a similar kind of check-in, of course, with some friends and folks that I know in the area, and it's just horrific to see the way that this violence continues to expand, continues to not discriminate. As you said, really no one is safe, and it continues to endanger everyone. Like, none of this is making anyone safer, as we know. And the grief that you and your community, your family are being asked to hold right now, I can't imagine. And those of us who are friends and allies on, this side of the world are watching on, and really feeling that sense of, what do we do? How do we support you all? How do we help you all? And I know you all are carrying that grief, and you're also carrying, I would imagine, this kind of strange sense of like, well, now Thursday and I have to go to work and I am expected to kind of live a normal life. I mean, what has that been like for you trying to navigate just everyday living in the midst of all of this?
Yeah, that's the kind of surreal part of it, right? Is that you are expected to continue even as you go through these experiences. So I'm a father, so you're supposed to calm your child down as she's reeling from all this. We are business owners, so you're expected to make calls on whether you're going to open the next day or not. And it's just been impossible to plan even 24 hours ahead throughout this whole year for all families here and all people here. It's just been constant instability in the household and in the business realm and all of it. It's just been constant instability. You can't plan a day ahead. You can't plan a week ahead. A lot of people say, why don't you take a break? Why don't you leave? And it's just like that. Even the thought of traveling right now seems so overwhelming. Like there's constant flight cancellations. There's even if you want to take a break and just go, you don't know if you'll be back in. There's this kind of feeling that you might get just stuck outside and not be let back in, or the country will be closed down because of total war, or the airport being shut down, and then you'll be disconnected from your family. And I know this is part of generational trauma, right, of Palestinians, and
leaving and not being able to come back.
Right. And so and I've had multiple people check in with me and write me and say, come stay with us. And just so you know, you have a place to stay if you ever need it. And I appreciate that. And it crosses my mind because I'm a father. I'm trying to keep my daughter safe, and I'm not trying to have her experience all this as I've had growing up and as my parents had and their parents. So I'm trying to break that cycle. But at the same time, the escalation just keeps growing and growing. And for the past year, instead of there being a peak and then calming down and going towards some kind of normalcy, it just keeps getting worse. Somehow it just keeps getting worse. And and for the folks that are trying to, a lot of people have also asked, like, what can we do? And as Americans, I think that's a very legitimate question, because the American role in this has been so significant, so crucial to this getting to the point of where it is, because we've seen empty rhetoric from the State Department, from the White House, from top leaders over and over again. Every time a massacre happens, we've seen State Department spokespersons come out and say, we're investigating this, we're coordinating with the Israelis, we're going to wait on the Israelis to investigate this. Every time that the Israeli Prime Minister has crossed red lines, we've seen the administration backtrack. And so for folks here, for Palestinians, for Israelis, for all the people that our Telos alumni, program alumni have met with, we're kind of looking at what we can do, but we're also looking back to our friends, our American friends back in the US, and saying there's a lot you can do. This is an election year. And there's been so many people that have actually, come out and advocated and demonstrated and spoken out, and people that are working behind the scenes to apply pressure. But we're really seeing that there is no real leadership in the US to break the cycle of violence. They think mistakenly that they can manage this situation. And the outcome of that has been just waking up to a worse situation than the day before for all of us here. And the feeling that this is only going to get worse tomorrow, the day after, next month. We're a year into this. And this past week, Israel has launched strikes and a ground invasion into Lebanon, meaning we're going to be maybe another year or two or three into this down the road, in a likely wider and more bloody war than the one we've already seen.
And we're already seeing the results of that, right? And as you mentioned, and as you experienced firsthand, this Iranian strike on Israel, I mean, this is the second time in the past year that this has happened. And we've heard from our leaders, from Israeli leaders, that this is going to get a response, right? And so we're seeing this continue to grow, which has been the warnings of our team of so many folks and, the national security apparatus and beyond, even in their region, saying we can't let this keep going because it will grow out of control. And that's what we're seeing on the ground. In fact, when you invest in violence as your only means of solutions, this is all you're going to receive in return is more violence, right? The frustrating thing is to see these tactics continue to be used without any strategy, and as you're saying, without any kind of accountability from our end and from our leaders. More than 60% of Americans want to see a ceasefire, want to see the US begin to condition aid to Israel in light of its abuses and its use of US aid and its blocking of humanitarian aid into Gaza. And yet there's been such little courage amongst our leaders to actually lean into that, right? And so it's an especially frustrating time. And I imagine a real deep sense of betrayal for you and your community looking on from your end of things onto America.
Right, and it begs the question of a larger question of the political apparatus in the U.S. Is there a way to hold our leadership when so many Americans want these things and so many Americans care about this issue and have seen how it, the consequences of this small territory have had global ramifications? Is there a political apparatus to hold American leaders accountable and elected officials accountable? And we're seeing that there are political interest groups and other powers that are much more that have more of a say than the majority of Americans. And so this is a much larger question about also the American political system, in my view, that's being uncovered here.
Yeah, absolutely. How do we create political will? How do we mobilize people in order to create real systemic change in light of the policies, the cultures, the momentum, and the money also that keep us investing in these losing strategies that ultimately harm all of us, right? This is keeping no one safe, no one more dignified. I think your point about this, especially most recent escalation in the invasion into Lebanon, being likely a 2 or 3 year, reality. I think that's probably what we're going to see. When all of this began, or at least this current escalation a year ago, what we heard was that this was just a response. It was targeted, it was limited, and here we are a year later. The same thing happened when the Israeli military began to invade Rafah, which the US had defined as a red line, right, in southern Gaza. And yet they said, well, it's not a major ground invasion, it's limited, it's targeted. And Rafah is now, essentially flattened, as you can see in photos, as we have eyewitness evidence of. And so the likelihood that this invasion into Lebanon is going to be limited, it's going to be targeted, it's very unlikely. And so we're all kind of gearing up for what this means. And I imagine you all, sitting with the uncertainty is a lot to manage. I'm particularly curious to hear from you about this kind of internal struggle that I imagine you're feeling and that you named a little bit earlier, of knowing the history of your heritage of the Palestinian people, of being kicked out of your land systematically, the vast majority of Palestinians being unable to return to their lands of their ancestors. And you are here, you are in Israel, historic Palestine today as a citizen because your family stayed. And so you have this special status in a way, special access in a way, to the land of your parents, your grandparents, and your ancestors. And so leaving becomes, it's not just a benign activity, it's something that's really deep. And yet you also want to protect your family, you also want to care for your community. Can you say a little bit more about that tension? Because I imagine that's really, really raw, and people probably don't understand all that is going into that for you.
I don't know if I have the words to really describe it to someone that hasn't lived it, that has not had family members that were displaced to all corners of the world. We have a great aunt in Spain. We've got family members in Toronto, and we've got family members across the U.S. and in different places, in Jordan and other places. And that's been our reality as a family and as Palestinians since 1948. And so this idea of history repeating itself, I mean, because we're seeing it repeat itself in Gaza, the images, if you look at the images of just flattened cities in Gaza, and then you look at images of Jaffa in 1948, flattened neighborhoods, and they're almost identical. And for us in this moment, you know, I've talked a lot about the Nakba, the Palestinian catastrophe, through my grandparents' narratives and histories, told histories, oral histories. But I've actually never realized the extent and the experience they lived until this past year, as I've been witnessing what Gazans have gone through.
Wow.
Trying to survive in this moment where your buildings are razed, the schools are gone, there's no shelter, you're trying to take care of family. Like, as all of this is being live streamed to our phones, this is becoming real at a much higher level. I've always kind of described Jaffa as going from 90,000 people to a city of 90,000 people to almost 3,000 people left. What does that look like in real life? How does that become so? We're seeing it firsthand right now. Mm-hmm. And so this realization that history can and is repeating itself has meant that it can repeat itself in terms of becoming refugees outside of this land, in terms of your turn in being targeted by the officials that are implementing a genocide against Palestinians in Gaza, implementing ethnic cleansing in many parts of the West Bank that is being, you know, barely talked about because of so many larger issues in Gaza and in Lebanon and elsewhere. You're just kind of sitting and waiting your turn in a way. And that's, if you ask most Palestinians in the West Bank, they're saying we're next. And in Palestinians, citizens of Israel, as we saw this week, if the violence is going to come from other Palestinians or from Israelis or from, you know, Iran, it's going to come from somewhere, and it's going to come to our front door.
And I think with that too, I mean, what we saw this past week, National Security Minister Ben-Gvir blamed a nearby mosque for harboring, you know, the shooters in this attack, when in fact they were the first to be threatened, and they were the first to you know, notify the police of this. And so even as a, you know, Palestinian citizen of Israel, you're seen as a fifth column, as a threat even to Jewish Israeli life.
Yeah, you're seeing that these characters here, they're like Ben-Gvir and Smotrich and Netanyahu, and these people that have garnered so much power in the past decade and plus, your future lies in their hands. And so he can make these, you know, claims, and these, if that video had not surfaced of the gunmen going into the mosque and threatening people, telling them, you better not step outside, then the mosque would have been associated, and it would have been an excuse to level that mosque and destroy that community and punish the Muslim community in Jaffa for the acts of two people that were not from the city, not from the mosque, and had actually targeted this community. And that's what we're seeing over and over again, whether it's in Jaffa or and elsewhere. This time the plan was foiled, but that's exactly it. It's we're seeing a leadership that is invested in a zero-sum game, and they're being funded. They're being funded by
they're
the
being
American
rewarded
administration.
for it.
They're being
at
rewarded.
This point.
Exactly. I mean, we saw a little bit in some signs of hope when settlement organizations that have nonprofit status in the U.S. Removed, or some have been sanctioned by the U.S. administration. But there should have been so much more momentum against that, to stop the expanding settlement activity, to stop the militant weaponization of settler groups and communities in the West Bank. During this genocide on Palestinians, we're seeing the American officials reward them with more aid packages, more armaments. Just this week, another $8.7 billion in aid has been announced to Israel.
And this is not a weapons sales. This is weapons aid. These are essentially free gifts, right? That we're offering on top of tens of billions of dollars of weapons sales that are happening from the US to the Israeli military.
Yeah. And I live in a community of Israelis and Palestinians, and I am in daily contact with Jewish Israelis that, come to our shop, that have coffee at our shop, that are parents at our school. And everyone is fed up. Everyone sees that this is just a cycle of violence that's never ending. And so when something like this is announced, it boggles all of our minds collectively. This is not just a Palestinian perspective on the issue. I mean, I'm sure a lot of hardline Israelis will disagree with me, but this is just does not make sense. Why are these actions being rewarded? Over 500,000 Jewish Israelis came out in opposition to Netanyahu because he is not stopping this war. He is not brokering a deal to release hostages and end the bloodshed. And yet, the American administration, again, sidelines these views, sidelines Palestinian perspectives, and chooses to reward the extremists here.
And ultimately, as you're saying, sidelines a huge proportion of Israeli society, right? And this, this gift, this kind of posture of, with no questions, with no conditions, we will give the Israeli government whatever they ask for. Ultimately, is not even pro-Israeli as they intend it to be. And so, what you're saying, that this investment in a zero-sum approach is ultimately endangering all of us, and it is helping no one. And so, I think what you're naming here is really important, and it's a kind of responsibility that many of us need to really own in this moment. I think after a year, there are a lot of Americans who are, frankly, probably exhausted from keeping up with the news, exhausted from calling their elected officials, from being in the streets, from having conversations with their friends and family, and perhaps church members or fellow colleagues, and administration and university faculty. And yet we don't, as I see it, have the privilege to let up in this moment, because our responsibility continues, our implication continues, and we have an immense opportunity to transform the patterns that we're stuck in right now.
We saw some of that attitude even within Israel in kind of about 4 to 6 months into the war on Gaza. And we saw some Israelis kind of go back to routine, feeling a little bit more safe, especially in the Tel Aviv area. There were less sirens then. And so this attitude of, I'm tired of listening to the news, this is happening all the way over there, it's just kicking the can down the road until the violence and the instability hits your front door. As we've seen, and as we've been saying for over a decade at Telos, the implications of the conflict in Israel-Palestine has global reach, and for sure has a reach to the U.S., being such a critical player in this area, in this region. And here we're seeing a regional war now that might expand even further to becoming something between Russia and the U.S., right? That might expand to global oil prices rising and creating instability across the world. So to think that this is not going to touch your life and your safety and in your community would be mistaken. Take it from us, from firsthand. This has gotten worse and worse and is reaching our front doors here, even in the privileged communities within Israel. And it's reached the front doors of Lebanese communities. It's reaching the front doors of Jordanian communities and Egyptian communities. And it's expanding, and it will for sure reach unabated. It's going to reach Americans, whether economically or security-wise even. Embassies are heightened security alerts. Officials all over the world are taking heightened security measures. And so this puts all of us in danger. We're all connected somehow.
That's right.
There is no way of saying what would happen somewhere else or to someone else doesn't affect me. We've seen this during the Corona years. We have yet to learn that lesson as a global community, as humanity. We have not learned that lesson, unfortunately.
I mean, we're seeing the results of believing that we can enjoy for ourselves what we deny our neighbor in your home, right? And it's true for us too, as you're saying, we are all interconnected. You know, as Mother Teresa famously said, as we often say on this show, if we have no peace, it is because we have forgotten we belong to each other. And we do belong to each other. There's no future for any of us without a future for all of us across the world in all places. And so to believe that we can, in our own backyards, you know, enjoy life as normal, and you know, there's a degree to which, you know, that exhaustion is real and understandable, but we have work to do, and we have joy on the other side of that work. That we have access to. That's joy for not just me and my family, but joy for all of us on the other side of healing, on the other side of justice. And for those of us who are tired, I want to acknowledge that in you. I want to name that it's okay to take a moment to rest, but there's no giving up. There's no despair for us in this moment. We don't have access to that privilege. Our choice has to be hope in action, hope being what we do, hope being the way that we live our life, such that it enables this future where Jack, our friend, his family, all of our friends across the region, Israelis, Palestinians, Lebanese, Jordanians, Iranians, all of them, all of us can enjoy dignity, security, and freedom. That's what we're here to do.
Thank you for that. I mean, it's that quote by Mother Teresa sometimes can feel like a bumper sticker or something cliche, but we're seeing how this plays out in real life, and just a clear example of how we do belong to each other. Yeah, and thanks for those comments. They sometimes it feels like we want to just be hopeful for the sake of being hopeful, but no, it's these lowest points in humanity that also offer us the potential for change and to break a system that has not worked for a long time. And so it's our moment to act in hopeful ways. It's our moment to act in every way possible to change this reality. So I'm sorry if I'm not too hopeful or too optimistic. I would say I'm definitely hopeful, but I'm not optimistic. I'm having a hard time, providing positive vibes and energies and what we can do in this moment, just because, as I said early on, it's been hard to even process. You don't have the time to process. Every 24 hours, you're dealing with a new crisis. And so we haven't really had time to process a lot of this information and see what we can do with it. But for our friends that are removed, that are writing me and others and checking in, maybe since you are a little bit removed, this is your time to process and to take some action, communal action together. And there are, as you said, over 60% of Americans, I would say over 50%, if not more, of Israelis want to see a ceasefire here, and Palestinians. And so there is a large enough community. We just have to coordinate together and move together and really take action.
You know, there's a Harvard sociologist who has documented the history of nonviolent movements across time and place, and violent movements for social change. And it notes that when just 3% of a population participates in public action in some way, a nonviolent movement has never failed historically. When we're seeing 60% plus engage, want to see our leaders engage in a new way, you're seeing hundreds of thousands of folks in Israel. When we sustain movement, it can't be stopped according to history. And so that's our opportunity today. You're naming this moment as being an immense opportunity, one of the lowest moments in living memory for many, many of us. And yet it's an opportunity to really reimagine and reconfigure the way that we will choose to live alongside each other. And man, no apology is necessary for not bringing any positive vibes. I mean, that's definitely, hopefully you did not hear that that's what I'm asking of you, because the grief that you're holding is really important. And we can't skip that step, man, of letting ourselves feel it and allowing that grief to be named and to be felt and to be offered to each other. And in fact, when we try to skip over it, we don't actually land in hope. We don't actually land in action. We land in apathy and despair, and in some ways even self-destruction. And so I've been talking a lot recently about to get to hope, you need three things. You have to start with lament. You have to start with grief. You have to feel and experience and acknowledge the loss. And only then can you move into a place of imagination, of beginning to see and envision something new and entirely reimagined, something where mutual flourishing, mutuality is possible. And with that understanding, then we can move into action. We can't skip the order of those steps, man. So I really appreciate you inviting us into the grief. We need to be open to it. We need to hear it, frankly, and it's a gift to us. So thank you. I do want to also ask, in this moment, how can we specifically support you or even the store, if there's anything from our end that we can do?
Sure. I mean, we're continuing to work. Through all this, we have a calling to, and we feel like what we are doing has an impact in the communities in the West Bank that we work with. I mean, we're buying products from Hebron, from places like Bethlehem that have, been I have not seen any tourists since October 7th. And these are communities that rely heavily on tourism. And so there is a way to support these communities. It's by still purchasing, and we're focusing on also, not just purchasing, but also kind of protecting handcrafts and these skills that are intergenerational, that go back centuries here in this land. So, if those of us that are listening feel called to join us in this project, there are other ways to support. Obviously, you could donate directly to some of the folks and families that you've met with here on Telos trips. But one easy way might be just to buy your gifts through the shop, and we're happy to share a coupon code for Telos alumni and listeners. So that'd be really appreciated. And everyone's purchase makes a difference, not just in their homes, but in all of our homes and all of our communities. So that'd be really appreciated during this period. Thank you. Those words are wise beyond your years, my man. Tiket, thank you for sharing.
Well, I've learned from some of the greats out there, including Mr. Jack Saba. So, and I got to tell you, folks, if you're looking for some nice stuff for the holidays for gifts, you have to check out Hillway Market. Truly, some great stuff. I have some stuff in my room that I keep up that I procured from my time over there, and it's such a gift to be able to reflect on, the friendships that we have, the communities that are to be cherished and loved and supported, and not only just grieved, right? There's so much beauty to still be remembered and acknowledged and valued and uplifted in this moment too. And that's part of our resistance collectively, folks, that we have to do it together. So consider that opportunity. I'll include a link to the store and a coupon code in the show notes. But Jack, any last words for our listeners?
I just appreciate anyone that's listening to this has chosen not to be overexhausted and overwhelmed by the constant engagement of this issue, has chosen to continue listening, chosen to continue caring and being part of this. And so a deep sense of appreciation, because it can feel lonely and isolating being here while you're living through this and nothing's changing. But I know, people have reached out from across the U.S. in this past week, in this past year. And there's a deep sense of appreciation and a deep belief that this community, this national community of Telos family and friends, and just a deep gratitude to you guys for continuing to do what you do. And hopefully on the next one, we'll have some more uplifting news.
We hope and pray, my friend, for sure. That's such a good word, man. Thank you to our network and to the listeners. You all have given so much over the past year and many years before that. And I know it may not feel like it's making a difference, but ultimately, when we look back from this moment, we won't be able to trace exactly how it happened. But when there is transformation, we will know that this work was meant something, and that it meant something, that it was important, that it was valuable We can't often see the fruits, but we're planting seeds, right? And that's our work today. And you all have been doing that for many months, many weeks on end. And we're grateful for it. At Telos and beyond, folks, what you do, what you are doing really matters. And we're here to support you in it. So, folks, thank you for listening. If you enjoyed the show, please feel free to leave a rating and review. As always, consider supporting Jack and Hillary Market and Telos, even in this moment as you look towards the end of the year and any giving you might have to do. And of course, we hope to have you listening again very soon.